The village of Mbara lay tucked along the sinuous curves of the river Aji, where the waters murmured old secrets to those who dared listen. Thick forest hemmed the village like a dark green wall, breathing mist into the air every dawn and swallowing the sun each evening long before it set. In Mbara, the river ruled everything, from when children were born to when crops were harvested to how the dead were laid to rest. And in this village, the mention of one girl's name carried more weight than a curse. Awa was born on the night the sky bled. The elders later called it an eclipse, but the villagers only remembered the red circle that hovered over their huts like an eye, unblinking, unmerciful. Her mother, barely 17 and already sick with fever, did not survive the birth. Awa came into the world with a quiet cry and eyes too wide, too knowing. They said she didn't wail like a normal baby, she simply watched, as if judging the midwives who wrapped her in damp cloth. Zina, her aunt, took the child in, not out of love but obligation. She was the dead girl's only remaining kin. From the beginning, Zina resented her. She'd spit near the cradle every morning and mutter, "Should have gone back into the womb and drowned." To the neighbors, she was a grieving sister doing her best. But inside her hut, her bitterness was a river with no bank. By the time Awa could walk, the whispers had begun. When she toddled through the village square, goats would grow restless and pull at their ropes. A week after she touched an elder's walking stick, the old man was found dead in his sleep. Once, she hummed to herself under the mango tree and the skies clouded over, stopping the rains for 3 full days during planting season. The villagers began to avoid her gaze. Mothers tugged their children inside when Awa passed. She was born under the blood moon, they whispered. No child born under such a sign grows without taking something. Awa grew up knowing she was watched but never welcomed. She wore second-hand wraps patched together with twine, and while other girls played in the fields, she stayed near the riverbank, tossing pebbles into the current. It was the only place she felt heard, the only place that didn't seem to push her away. The river Aji didn't mind her silence. It moved around her feet gently when she stood in the shallows and once even brought her a smooth red stone shaped like a heart. But kindness from nature did little to shield her from cruelty at home. Zina used her as a servant. "Sweep faster, spirit child," she'd hiss. "Don't curse the broom with your slowness." Meals were never enough. Slaps came quickly. Kindness never came at all. Still, Awa never fought back. She learned how to be small. She learned how to fade into walls. But the river always watched her. One hot afternoon, the village children played near the water's edge, though they knew the rules forbade it during the dry season when currents could turn treacherous. A boy, barely 6, slipped on a mossy rock and tumbled into the river's grip. Screams rang out. No one moved. Except Awa. She leapt in, arms slicing the water, braid trailing behind like a tether to the shore. She reached him in seconds, holding his chin above the current, kicking with wild strength. When they emerged gasping and soaked, a hush fell over the gathered villagers. Then someone hissed, "She pushed him in." Another voice followed. Or maybe she pulled him out to finish what she started. Awa looked up, water dripping from her lashes, hands still shaking from the weight of the boy she saved. But no one thanked her. No one stepped forward. And so began the story that the river would never forget. It was the night of the 3rd moon when Awa vanished. The villagers remembered the silence first, thick, unnatural. Not even the frogs dared to croak. A single lantern burned weakly outside Zina's hut, its flame dancing wildly though there was no wind. When dawn came, the village rooster did not crow. Zina was the first to raise the alarm. She stood by the riverbank, her eyes red, her hands smeared with river silt. "She's gone," she cried to the gathering crowd. "I found her body by the rocks, floating face down." She threw herself in. No one questioned her. No one asked to see the body. Why would they? It was Awa. The cursed girl. The child who'd brought droughts and whispers and unnatural deaths. Zina's voice, cracking with the perfect rhythm of grief, filled the hush. "The river has taken her. May it finally be at peace." By midday, the elders assembled. As tradition demanded, her body was wrapped in palm leaves and tied with river grass. A carved coin was placed beneath her tongue, for passage to the ancestors. Then, they laid her on a reed raft, as was custom for those who died by their own hand. The river would carry her away, past the village boundaries, into the wide unknown. It would be the end of the girl they never understood. The villagers stood at the river's edge, stone-faced. Some crossed their arms. A few muttered prayers under their breath, hoping her spirit wouldn't linger. Xena stood near the raft, dry-eyed now, her hands folded too tightly, jaw set like flint. She had not allowed anyone to help prepare Awa's body. She claimed it was her duty as the only family. She had washed the body herself. She had bound the wraps tightly, tied the weights with care. She had even sealed the girl's eyes with ash, whispering, "Don't you dare open again." As the sun passed its peak, the elders gave the nod, and the raft was pushed gently into the river Aji. It floated outward slowly, drifting with the current. Then it paused. A gust of wind blew inland, and the raft spun lazily in place, once, twice, before it began to drift upstream. Upstream. A gasp rippled through the gathered villagers. No one moved. No one breathed. The raft, carrying the shrouded form, floated gently past them, back the way it had come. Someone whispered, "No," as if denial could change what the eyes saw. A few children clung to their mothers, weeping silently. Others simply turned their backs. They tried again. Paddlers were sent to push it deeper into the current. The second launch was more forceful, the chants louder. This time, the raft traveled farther. But just as it rounded the first bend, it halted once more, and spun, slowly, deliberately, like a warning, before gliding upstream again. By the third attempt, even the elders looked uneasy. Sweat beaded their brows, not from heat, but dread. The third launch was done in silence. No chants. No words. Just trembling hands pushing the raft into the sacred waters, as if to appease something unseen. And again, the river refused. The raft came back, not hurriedly, not forcefully. Gently. Gracefully. As if the river was cradling the body. As if it said, "No. This one does not belong to the dead." That night, the village was silent once more. No fires burned. Doors were bolted early. Children were forbidden to speak her name. "Do not call what should not be called," one elder warned. The river remembers. Let it forget. Xena did not join the elders that evening. She sat alone in her hut, eyes darting to the corners where shadows seemed to shift. She did not eat. She did not sleep. In the center of the room lay Awa's few belongings, a chipped comb, a threadbare scarf, a small stone she'd kept from the river. With shaking hands, Xena lit a fire and fed each item into the flames. As the scarf curled and blackened, she whispered, "You are gone. You are gone. You will not return." But the fire cracked in response, loud, sharp, unnatural, and the last thing to burn, the river stone, did not crumble. It turned red-hot, then cold, then red again, pulsing like a heartbeat. Xena backed away from the fire and didn't sleep the entire night. Outside, the river flowed, not toward the sea, but in slow circles, whispering a name the village dared not say. The days after the river's refusal were heavy and wet. Clouds gathered above Mbara, thick and swollen with unshed rain, and the river Aji began to swell without warning. Not with stormwater or melted mountain snow, but with something else, something slower and darker. It crept up the banks like a rising breath, inch by inch, until the lowest yam fields were drowned in silence. No rain had fallen, yet the water moved as if pulled by an invisible tide. At first, the villagers thought it was coincidence, a natural swell, a bad season, a warning from the ancestors. But as days passed, the water did not recede. It slithered farther inland, curling around trees and creeping toward huts built generations ago. The reeds near the fishing docks turned black. The frogs, usually deafening at dusk, fell silent. And then came the singing. It started faint, like a hum caught in the wind, soft and sweet, threading between the leaves at night. A lullaby. Gentle. Familiar. Mothers froze at their hearths when they heard it. They recognized the tune. Awa had sung it often, a quiet melody without words. No one had taught her that song. She always said it came from her dreams. Now it drifted through the village like a memory refusing to fade. Children began to speak of strange things. Little Duma said she saw someone combing hair by the water in the moonlight. Kato claimed he followed a trail of white river shells leading to a shadow that vanished when he blinked. But most chilling was what came from Kofi. Kofi had never spoken. His voice was stolen by fever when he was a baby, and words had never returned. But he had eyes that missed nothing and a gift for drawing what he saw. He and Awa had been inseparable, a friendship born in silence, held by shared loneliness. When she vanished, he spent his days near the river, watching. One morning, he placed a drawing before the elders. It showed the river, dark and full, under a silver moon. In the shallows stood a figure, not ghostly or monstrous, but unmistakably Awa. Her eyes were open, her feet bare, her hands folded in front of her like she was waiting. She stood facing the village, not the current, and around her ankles the water rippled outward as though afraid to touch her. The drawing spread quickly. Some dismissed it, saying Kofi's grief had turned to fantasy. But others saw the precision in the lines, the shape of her jaw, the way her hair curled at the ends, the small scar on her left arm. Details no spirit should carry. Fear deepened. At night, no one walked near the riverbanks. Fishermen stopped casting nets. Children were called inside before sunset. A goat that wandered too close was found drowned in shallow water, its eyes wide with something like terror. No one could explain how it had died, not by teeth or wound or sickness. Just drowned. Quietly. Then came the edict, no singing near the water. The village chief announced it during a rainless thunderclap, his voice brittle with dread. The river listens. We will not tempt it further. No humming. No whistling. No lullabies. Silence is the only gift we offer now. Mothers scolded children for murmuring old tunes. Lovers who once sang under moonlight held their tongues. Even the griot, the old songkeeper, stopped his nightly chants, closing his mouth as if to hold his soul inside. But the silence didn't help. The lullaby still came. Always at night. Always soft. Kofi began sleeping outside Zena's hut, as if keeping watch. She hated it, she could feel his eyes judging her, the same way Awa's once had. One morning, she found another drawing left on her doorstep. This one showed only a single hand, Awa's hand, recognizable by the thin bracelet she always wore, reaching out of the water. Zena burned it. But fire did not quiet the river. And deep in the night, as the lullaby threaded once more through the trees, even the bravest of men found themselves praying to gods they'd forgotten. Because Awa's name was never spoken aloud again. But her song never stopped. Zena had always been a sharp-edged woman, quick with words, quicker with blame. She ruled her small compound with clenched fists and louder silences. But in the weeks after the river refused Awa, she grew brittle in a different way, not fierce, but frayed. Her eyes no longer met anyone's. Her fingers trembled when she lit her cooking fire. She flinched at the sound of water. Sleep no longer came easily. When it did, it brought dreams that wrapped around her like wet vines. In them, Awa stood tall, no longer the silent girl who obeyed without protest, but a woman grown, shrouded in riverweed, skin glistening like obsidian, eyes black and bottomless as the river's mouth. She never spoke in the dreams. She only watched. Each time Zena woke, drenched in sweat, she would rush to her jug to wash her face, only to find the water already disturbed, as if someone else had just touched it. She stopped drawing water from the river altogether and sent children in her stead. They refused. She offered coins. They ran. Then came the whispers. Zena's hut, once a place where neighbors dropped in for firewood or spices, now sat alone. People crossed the path to avoid it. At the well, voices dropped when she arrived. She lied, someone muttered. That girl didn't drown on her own. It didn't take long for the truth to begin unraveling. One morning, an old woman named Mama Iyer hobbled into the market square, dragging her wooden cart. Her voice was thick with age, but her words struck like thunder. I saw the signs, she declared. The girl was marked. Zina knew. Some laughed at first. Mama Iyer had long been seen as the village's fated oracle, a woman whose mind had drifted along strange paths for decades. But then she opened her pouch and drew out something small, wrapped in faded cloth. Inside was a carving, not more than a finger's length, of a serpent wrapped around a woman's spine, etched into bone. She carried this to me 2 moons before her death, Mama Iyer said. Said she found it in the hollow tree by the river. Said it burned in her hands when she held it. The crowd leaned closer. This is no child's trinket. This is royal, the old woman continued. From the old blood. The drowned kingdom beneath Aji's mouth. Only the chosen are drawn to it. Gasps stirred. Everyone had heard the tale, half myth, half cautionary fable, of the drowned queen, who ruled a water kingdom swallowed by flood for its betrayals. Her daughters, they said, were born once in every generation, girls who walked between the living and the drowned, marked by silence, touched by the river's will. And always betrayed. Always by blood. Zina, upon hearing the commotion, stayed hidden. But her face was pale when she stepped out later that day. And her hands would not stop trembling. Inside her hut, madness bloomed. She began to see things in mirrors, flashes of a face that wasn't hers. Wet footprints led from the door to the foot of her sleeping mat, only to vanish by morning. When she touched the walls, water beaded beneath her fingers. One night, she lit a candle and caught Awa's shadow behind her, tall and still. But when she turned, there was nothing. She shattered every reflective surface in her home. Still, she saw. In puddles. In polished gourds. Even in her own eyes when she tried to sleep. She tried to reason with the ghosts. You were never meant for more, she hissed into the darkness. You were just a burden. A reminder. But the darkness did not answer. It only dripped, slow, rhythmic, like water from a ceiling that should have been dry. She tore off her roof and patched it anew. Still the dripping continued. Her breath grew shallow. Her world shrank to the corners of her hut. And yet, the dreams persisted. Awa, always standing. Always silent. Always closer. Then one evening, Kofi left another drawing on her doorstep. It showed Zina, alone, hunched, wide-eyed. Behind her stood Awa, hand resting gently on her shoulder, as though in forgiveness. Or warning. Zina tore it in half and burned it. But even the fire didn't burn clean. The edges turned black, but the center remained intact. Awa's hand still touching her shoulder. Still watching. Word spread that Zina had taken to speaking to empty corners. That she wandered the edge of the riverbank at dusk, mumbling apologies into the wind. That she had begun to scratch her arms raw, muttering, "It won't come off. It won't come off." One night, the drips in her room grew loud enough to wake the neighbors. No one dared go inside. When they finally did, they found the floor soaked, as if the river had passed through. But the roof was dry. And there was no sign of a leak. Only Zina, rocking in the corner, whispering, she was meant to drown, not rise. It began with the rain, soft at first, a gentle weeping from the sky that settled over Mbara like a shroud. The villagers were used to rain. It came and went with the moods of the river and the whispers of the trees. But this time, it didn't stop. For 3 days and nights, the heavens poured without pause. The soil could no longer drink. The huts, crafted from mud and woven reeds, began to sag. Chickens drowned in their coops. The yam fields were swallowed whole. The river Aji, once a loyal guardian and source of life, rose higher than anyone could remember. It breached its banks, surged into homes, uprooted trees, and carved new paths through the land like a god reshaping its domain. people climbed onto roofs with their children in their arms. Fires went out. Cooking ceased. The village turned into a huddle of silhouettes against a sky that never brightened. On the third evening, just before dusk, the rain stopped. Not gradually, not in the gentle tapering of a storm's farewell, but all at once, like a great door had slammed shut in the clouds. The silence that followed was unnerving, even more than the roar of the flood. It was as if the sky had held its breath, waiting. Then someone screamed. The cry came from the eastern edge of the village, near the old fisherman's dock, now half submerged in murky brown water. A boy had seen something floating in from the bend, something large, slow, deliberate. The villagers gathered, barefoot in the mud, their clothes clinging to soaked skin. Eyes strained in the fading light. It was a raft. A reed raft, perfectly intact, gliding over the floodwaters like it remembered the path it had once failed to take. And on it, wrapped in palm leaves, arms crossed gently over her chest, skin unwrinkled, lips faintly pink, lay Awa. Her body had not decayed. Her clothes were dry. Her face held the same quiet expression she'd worn in life. Not peace. Not sleep. Patience. The raft came to rest at the edge of the water, as if guided by invisible hands. Not one ripple dared disturb it. No insect dared land upon it. The villagers stood in paralyzed silence. Zena, watching from the threshold of her hut, fell to her knees. The elders were summoned. Though their bones ached and their minds were soaked with fear, they came. The oldest among them, Elder Tando, whose father had once spoken of the drowned kingdom, stood before the raft, his staff trembling in his grip. "We must bless the river," he whispered, more to himself than the crowd. "Appease it. Seal what is opened." 3 ritualists stepped forward, women draped in red and white beads, their faces painted with clay, their mouths full of incantations. They stood in a half-circle at the water's edge, arms raised high, calling on the river spirits, on the ancestors, on gods too old to name. But the river did not want their words. It responded with a wave. Not like the tides at sea, but a sudden, coiled lurch from beneath, like something deep had stirred and risen. The water surged, twisted, and snapped forward, a serpent of liquid wrath. The ritualists were swept off their feet, pulled under before the crowd could scream. One managed to grab a branch, clinging for dear life, coughing and sobbing, while the others vanished beneath the churn. Their cries were muffled almost instantly. Then, stillness again. The raft had not moved. Not a single drop of water touched Awa's body. It was Kofi who stepped forward. He had been watching from the back, his frame small and still. He had not spoken since the river had taken the ritualists. He simply walked, barefoot through the mud, until he reached the raft. No one stopped him. He climbed onto the raft slowly, carefully. His fingers trembled as he reached out, not to touch her, but to kneel beside her. He folded his hands, bowed his head, and for a long moment, there was only the sound of the wind threading through broken leaves. Then Awa opened her eyes. Only for a second. They were not clouded with death, nor glazed like those of the drowned. They were clear. Focused. And they looked directly at Kofi. Something passed between them, something unsaid but understood. Kofi's breath caught in his throat. His hand moved instinctively to his chest, where his heart thudded like a drum. A single tear escaped down his cheek. Then her eyes closed again. Her chest did not rise. Her limbs remained still. But the sense of her presence, had shifted. It was no longer a body lying on a raft. It was something else. Kofi stepped down from the raft, his bare feet sinking into the mud. He didn't turn back to the villagers. He only walked until he stood beside the chief and, with great effort, reached up and pulled the chief's hand forward, guiding it toward the raft. A child had led a leader. And the river stayed silent. For now. The days that followed the raft's return were heavy with unspoken words. No one dared touch Awa's body again. No one tried to send her away. She remained on the raft, resting by the bank under a woven canopy, untouched by birds, insects, or decay. It was as though the river guarded her now, not in grief, but in judgment. The village of Mbara was not one of quick tempers, but fear had festered too long. The yam fields were ruined, 3 people were dead, and the river's rebellion had unsettled the bones of every elder. Children had stopped laughing. Mothers avoided mirrors. Even the chief, a man not known for superstition, refused to speak after dark. One morning, as the mist rolled thick and low across the ground, the villagers gathered beneath the old baobab tree at the center of Mbara. They came not with fire and rage, but with silence, the kind that preceded storms. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. Then she arrived, Mama Iyer, the oldest of the old. Her back was bent like a river bend, her face carved by time into sharp ridges and deep valleys, but her voice was strong. She stood before them with her staff and said, "The river will not forget. But it may forgive. Not through ritual. Not through sacrifice. Only through truth." She raised her hand and pointed toward the narrow path that led to Zena's hut. "You must speak it," she said. "Or she will rise again, not as girl, not as water, but as reckoning." Zena was brought forth that evening. Not by guards or chains, but by her own feet. She walked slowly, as if every step dragged stones behind it. Her clothes hung loose, damp at the hem. Her hair, once tightly braided, now fell in uneven strands. Her face had lost its fury, but gained a haunted stillness. The villagers circled around her like birds around carrion. Kofi sat near the edge, still as a carved drum, a charcoal stick clutched in one hand, a sheet of blank bark paper in the other. The chief stood beside Mama Iyer. A fire cracked in the center of the circle. "You are accused," the chief said, "not only of lies, but of betrayal. Not only of bloodshed, but of bringing a curse upon this land." Zena said nothing. "Do you deny it?" he asked. She looked up, eyes swollen, voice hoarse. "I don't." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Someone gasped. Someone spat. Mama Iyer stepped forward. "Speak it all," she commanded. "From the beginning. The river must hear. The land must know." Zena blinked. Then her shoulders sagged, and the words poured out like a wound opening. She was too quiet. Always watching. Always knowing things no one told her. I thought maybe she was what they said. Bad luck. Cursed." Her voice broke. But it wasn't just fear. It was envy. She looked at her hands, as though seeing them for the first time. She had something. Something I never had. Peace. Even in misery. And one day, while cleaning the reed mats, I found it, the bone carving. Small, but powerful. Serpent around a woman's spine. It pulsed in my hand. I saw visions I didn't understand. Zena's gaze flicked upward. She told me she found it by the hollow tree near the river. I told her to give it to me. She hesitated. That's when I knew it was hers by right. Silence held the circle like glue. So I waited until she was sick, just a fever, barely a cough. I added poison to her palm tea. Not much. Just enough to slow her breath, cool her skin. I told everyone she'd drown herself. I dressed her body. I wrapped it. I thought I was ending something. But you awakened it, Mama Iyer said. Zena nodded. Even in death, she returned. Not to haunt me. But to complete something I tried to erase. The villagers looked at one another, stunned. Some clutched their chests. Others wept silently. The chief turned toward the fire. "The ancestors require balance," he said. "Your crime was not only against Awa, but against the river that bore witness. The only justice is the path you feared most." He looked at her, his voice grave. "You are to walk the river's edge, from the northern bend to the mouth of the delta. No home. No roof. No name. If the river decides to take you, it will be your judgment. If it refuses, then you may return, but not here. Never again in Bara. Xena didn't beg. She didn't cry. She bowed her head, and for the first time in her life, she was truly silent. Then, from the edge of the crowd, a sound broke through. It was a voice, soft, uncertain, but human. She was never meant to leave us. Heads turned. Eyes widened. Kofi had stood. He stood with his drawing clutched to his chest and his eyes glistening with tears. His voice, unused for so long, cracked like a dry branch. She belonged here. It was not just grief. Not just sorrow. It was truth. The river lapped gently in the distance, almost in approval. And as Xena turned away and began her long walk along the river's cursed path, the people of Mbara stood still, not in anger, but in awe. Because they knew. The girl they had cast out was no longer among them. But she was not gone. She had become something more. And the river was still watching. The morning after Xena began her exile, the river Aji began to retreat. Slowly, deliberately, the waters slithered back into their banks, releasing the fields, the docks, the courtyards of Mbara. Where it had once raged and swallowed, it now moved with grace, like a great beast satisfied. The air changed too, the heaviness lifted, and the clouds rolled away as though drawn by invisible hands. Sunlight touched the wet soil for the first time in weeks, and steam rose from the earth like a blessing. By midday, children were running again. Not close to the river, not yet, but within sight of it. Mothers let out the breaths they'd been holding. Elders emerged from their homes and lifted their faces to the light. The village, once gripped by silence, began to murmur with cautious life. But it was Kofi who noticed first. He had not spoken again since the night of the trial. He didn't need to. He walked alone, barefoot through the soft mud, until he reached the riverbank where Awa's raft had once floated. Now it lay grounded, half buried in the receding waterline. But Awa was gone. No sign of her body. No trace of weight or presence. Only a single object remained, resting in the center of the raft, untouched by rot or stain. The carved bone. Still smooth, still pulsing faintly warm. The serpent coiled around the woman's spine had deepened in color, almost as if it had drunk from the river itself. Kofi bent to pick it up. His hand trembled, but the moment his fingers touched the bone, a strange calm fell over him. The warmth spread through his palm, up his arm, into his chest, a beat that matched the river's pulse. He turned and ran. By sundown, the villagers gathered again, this time at the riverside not in fear, but in awe. Kofi held the relic aloft. Mama Iyer stood beside him, her gnarled hands wrapped around her staff, her eyes wide with something like reverence. She is gone from this world, the old woman said, but she has not passed. She was claimed, whispered one man. No, Mama Iyer corrected. She was crowned. The elders listened. The villagers fell silent. And the tale began to spin, not as fear, but as legacy. Awa, the girl born beneath a blood moon. Awa, the one they called cursed. Awa, who saved a child and was accused. Awa, who was betrayed by blood and refused by death. She had not died. She had risen. She is the water bride, Mama Iyer said that night, her voice as steady as the river's breath. One with the spirits now, guardian of the outcast, voice of the silenced. Her raft was never a burial. It was a throne. From that day, the people of Mbara began to change. The patch of land where the raft had come to rest was cleared and cleaned. The villagers worked with care and intention, building a shrine of driftwood, river stones, and woven reeds. No grand monuments. Nothing ostentatious. Just a raised platform beneath a wide tree, where offerings could be placed and songs could be sung, softly, gently, only at dusk. At the center of the shrine, set within a shallow bowl of polished black stones, lay the carved bone. It was never touched again. Every seventh day, families brought gifts, bracelets made from braided grass, painted gourds filled with honey, dolls carved from ebony wood. But the most important offering was always silence. A moment when the village stood together, heads bowed, listening not to each other, but to the rustle of leaves, the hush of the river, the hum of the world. It was not guilt that brought them, it was reverence and gratitude. But perhaps the most profound change was in Kofi. He was no longer just a silent boy with haunted eyes. He became something more, a guide, a keeper, a bridge. He took it upon himself to care for the shrine. Every morning, he swept the ground with a handmade broom of soft reeds. He repaired any damage with patience. He tended to the offerings, repositioned them with care, and kept the relic at the center clean and glistening. And though he rarely spoke, children flocked to him. They followed him to the river, where he taught them how to approach the water, barefoot and slow. How to kneel and cup the surface without splashing. How to listen with their chests, not their ears. He drew for them, pictures in the mud and on bark, of Awa not as she had died, but as she had become, tall, cloaked in flowing river grass, her eyes endless as night, her lips curved in something deeper than a smile. A knowing. A promise. Under Kofi's quiet tutelage, the children learned a new language. Not one of words, but of gesture. They began to understand the river not as a thing to be feared, but respected, a living memory of those who were wronged, and those who rose beyond it. The village changed, slowly but surely. The shame that once clung to Mbara softened. The gossip died. People began to look at the strange ones, the quiet, the odd, the outcast, with new eyes. They saw not curses, but callings. And at dusk, when the wind carried faint notes of an old lullaby through the reeds, no one turned away. They listened. Not in fear, but in faith. Because now they knew, Awa had not vanished. She had become part of the river, part of the trees, part of them. The water bride watched. And she remembered everything. The sun had barely crested the treetops when the stranger arrived. He came cloaked in deep indigo, riding no beast and carrying no visible supplies, yet his feet were clean and his posture regal. His face was hidden behind a carved wooden mask, smooth and painted gold with symbols unfamiliar to anyone in Bara. The mask had no mouth, only two dark, oval eyes that seemed to absorb everything. He walked straight to the village square, where children paused their play and adults hushed their chatter. It was Kofi who first noticed the traveler carried something, a long, cloth-wrapped bundle slung over his back, and a scroll too bound in copper, glowing faintly in the sun. He spoke with a voice low and distant, as if echoing from a cave. "I seek the shrine of the water bride." Elders exchanged glances. One stepped forward. "Who sends you?" He did not answer directly. Instead, he unwrapped the bundle before them, and inside were ancient artifacts, rusted rings, twisted necklaces, a crown bent by time. But what drew everyone close was the object at the center, a carved bone, identical to the one resting on Awa's shrine. The village buzzed with whispers. Even the chief took an uncertain step forward. Kofi came then, emerging from the edge of the shrine path, and approached the traveler. He did not speak, only lifted the carving that had belonged to Awa. As he held it beside the new one, the resemblance was undeniable, but there were differences. The serpent on the stranger's bone was wrapped around a tree. Awa's had wrapped around a woman. The traveler finally spoke again. She was the last of the drowned line, the blood of Queen Nyasha, swallowed by flood and forgotten by time. Her people were scattered. Her daughters erased. Her power buried beneath the river's silence. The villagers stood frozen. They had heard tales of Nyasha, a queen said to have ruled a glittering city beside the sea, before a storm of betrayal dragged her kingdom beneath the waves. But those were bedtime stories, legends buried with childhood. Not history. Not reality. She carried the relic, the traveler continued, which had been lost for over 100 years. She awakened the water's memory. He opened the scroll tube and unfurled a parchment lined with fine ink and symbols, a royal seal no one recognized, pressed with wax the color of deep sapphire. She was the key, he said, his voice soft now, almost reverent. Not because she sought power, but because she held pain without hate. The river knows its heirs. It chose her. Mama Iyer stepped forward, her voice cracked but steady. "What now?" The stranger set the scroll down at the base of the shrine and bowed low, lower than any noble had bowed in living memory. "The waters have shifted. What was lost begins to stir beneath the current. I am only the first to hear the call. Others will come. Not to rule, but to remember." He turned to leave, but before he disappeared into the forest path, he paused and said one final thing. "The river has chosen its heir." Then he was gone. The scroll remained. When opened, it revealed a map, a faded tracing of the old kingdom's edge, but now marked with a symbol identical to Awa's carving. At the center was the river itself, spiraling like a coiled guardian. Kofi took it to the shrine and placed it beneath the bowl that held the relic. That night, the river shimmered under the moonlight. And some swore they saw a figure standing at the farthest bend, not ghostly, not sad, but radiant, draped in reeds and crowned in silver. Watching. Waiting. Rising. The rains returned one evening without warning, not the violent downpours that had flooded the village weeks ago, but something different. The air was charged, the clouds thick but silver-edged, as if the heavens were lit from within. Thunder rumbled not as threat, but as announcement. And in that twilight storm, when the rice fields shimmered like mirrors and the wind bent the tallest trees in half, villagers began to see her. She moved slowly through the shallow water, tall, upright, graceful. Her feet left no ripples. Her hair flowed behind her like rivergrass. Her skin, dark as wet bark, glowed with the light of something far older than fire. And her eyes, if one dared look, were full of knowing, bottomless and still. Awa. No longer the girl they had misunderstood, pitied, feared. She had become something otherworldly. Rain slid from her like silk. Lightning framed her like a crown. No one approached. No one called out. They simply stood at the edge of the water, men, women, children, and watched as she moved across the flooded fields, pausing briefly beside the shrine before fading into the mist. Her presence lingered, like the hush after a heartbeat. And then she was gone. That night, the dreams began. Not for the elders, nor for the men who had once mocked her name, but for the young girls, the silent ones, the curious ones, the ones too easily forgotten. They awoke in the morning with their hair damp, even though the storm had passed. They spoke in quiet voices of a woman in white who had sat with them under a giant tree and taught them how to braid rain into their hair. How to lay their palms on the soil and feel what trees remember. How to hum the old lullabies that healed rather than mourned. They did not fear the dreams. They wanted them again. And through them, Bara began to change. Women who had once been outcast, the childless, the widowed, the ones who spoke too plainly or laughed too loud, began to gather by the shrine at dawn. Not with rituals, but with intent. They cleaned the shrine without being asked. They planted herbs known only to the oldest tongues. They began to lead the morning market, decide when to sow and when to harvest, not by the stars, but by the river's voice. The men did not resist. They sensed something had shifted. That the village itself had tilted towards something ancient, something just. When a child fell sick, it was not the healer but one of the rain women, as they came to be called, who sat beside her, touched her brow, and whispered a song known only to the leaves. And by dusk, the child rose again. People no longer feared the river. They greeted it each morning with open palms and offered it silence before drawing water. The shrine was never empty. Flowers bloomed along its base that no one had planted. But the river had not finished its work. One morning, after a long night of soft rains, a fisherman paddling farther than usual came upon a cluster of reeds tangled around something pale. At first, he thought it a tree limb. Then he saw the bones. The rib cage had opened like the hull of a broken canoe, and through it grew reeds, tall, green, and tipped with golden tufts. One had pierced the heart of the remains, rooted in her spine. It was Xena. Her skull was half buried in sand, jaw locked in what looked like a scream or a prayer. Around her, the water was still, almost reverent. The fisherman didn't touch her. He paddled back and told the chief. the elders gathered, said the river had taken its justice. No burial was held. No name spoken. But the rain women came. They walked barefoot to the bend where she was found and planted 7 small stones in a ring around the site. Then they stood in silence, heads bowed. One whispered, "Let the earth remember what we must not." And that was all. In the months that followed, the river remained calm. Crops flourished. The village's children grew strong and curious. And each time the wind passed through the reeds, it carried with it a sound like a hum, low, sweet, and familiar. The rain woman was no longer a figure of fear. She had risen. And she would never fade. Generations passed like quiet ripples on the surface of the river Aji. Bara grew and changed, its edges stretching wider, its huts taller, its paths smoothed by time and countless feet. But the shrine never changed. It stood at the water's edge, half crystal, half driftwood, delicate and gleaming like the river's own breath. Moss never touched it. Insects dared not rest upon it. Even the fiercest storms curved around it, as though remembering. Every child in Bara was brought to the shrine before they could walk. They were told the story, not of fear, but of grace. Of the girl who was cast out and claimed, the girl who rose not for vengeance, but for something deeper. One year, a baby girl was born during the season's first flood. She did not cry. She hummed, a low, rhythmic sound that made the old women in the birthing hut fall silent. When they bathed her, they found the mark, a faint, shimmering wave curling across her chest, as if drawn by the river's own finger. As she grew, she often wandered to the shrine alone. She placed flowers without being taught, sat for hours listening to the reeds, and hummed the tune that had not been sung in decades, Awa's lullaby. The same notes. The same rhythm. No one taught it to her. No one had to. And every year, on the night the river once refused to carry a girl's body, the water glowed blue, soft, pulsing, alive. The wind curled through the shrine's branches, through the hair of the watchers, and whispered a name that no longer carried shame. Awa. And in that moment, the villagers knew. The river does not forget the wronged. But neither does it forget the worthy.